My name is Douglas Wanja. I work for the University of Nairobi, the Institute for Development Studies, and where we are running various projects on behalf of the government. And one of the projects that we are really closely working on is called the Data for Governance Alliance Project. And this project is under the Afrobarometer framework, where we support the civil society organizations that work closely with the African Union to use data in their advocacy work across areas like good governance, human rights, and democracy. So we are gathered here in Kenya, brought here by the Pan-African Parliament, and we are having what we are calling the Pan-African Youth Forum. And this Pan-African Youth Forum is that we just want to discuss the issues of the youth and how the youth can actually be part and parcel of the conversation of the African Union on various aspects, especially on education, technology, and how the youth people, the young person can actually be able to advocate and work with the African Union.
Yeah. So, there has been this perception that has been ongoing in every country that CSOs and the government have to be enemies, or they don't have to be rivals. Yeah. How do you take this, and how do you ensure that the government and the CSOs work together and be about the education and education system here in Africa?
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think you're very right that for many years, the civil society organization has always been seen like an enemy with the government. But I actually think that having worked with the African Union for some time, and having worked with quite a number of CSOs across the West African region, East African region, and Southern African region, I have actually come to realize that civil society organizations should actually complement the works of the government. What the civil society organizations have done in the past, I think they have been too aggressive in the way they address the issues, and maybe they have also not been reading or knowing what their mandates are. And over time, I've seen that that narrative is changing. The civil society organizations now try more to complement what the government's doing, because the work of the civil society organization is actually supposed to look at the rules, the regulations, the policies, the charters that exist in government, and just help the government just to follow through on the promises that it has set out. And I think you're very right that moving forward, I think the narrative is changing. The civil society organization now is a friend of the government. The only challenge that now exists is whereby the civil society organization that are very strong, and the government fears them. The government sometimes try to sabotage the work that they do, maybe denying them resources, denying them the space to be able to address intimidation, those kind of things. And I think that we see it across the whole African continent. But moving forward, I think as a project, our main focus to be able to support the civil society organization has been to bring the government for them in the house, to bring the African Union for them in the house, to bring the East African community for them in the house, so that they become friends. And we've noted that over time, for the last 3 years since the project began, is that now many civil society organizations are closely coming up with the collaborations, MOUs with not only the African Union, but also with our local governments across the continent. And I think that is what we want to see. We want to see everyone doing what they're supposed to do. If one is supposed to check what the government is supposed to do and all the promises that has made to the people, and they're able to follow through on that, then that's a positive. If the government also is open and receptive to critics from the civil society, then that's good. And our main focus in this project is to promote that coexistence between the African Union, all these regional economic communities like East African Community, ECOWAS, SADC, and just for them to work closely with their government and to be able to know that they should actually complement the works of their local governments.
So, CSOs all over Africa, that's the main perspective, and I'm glad that you're trying to change even the perspective of how people perceive government and CSOs. Yeah, what is that common challenge that you have seen? Because today we are talking about matters education for this particular forum. Yeah, what are some of those challenges that you have had CSOs and government have been facing in terms of education, and how has the African Union and the Pan-African Parliament come through and decided on how they can be able to change these particular problems and how they can be able to commonize maybe education in Africa?
Yeah. So when it comes to the challenges that civil societies face in the current world, in 2024 to say, I think the biggest challenge has been many civil society organizations have been fighting for relevance and especially getting to be heard in the areas that they are working on. And in that particular perspective, they need the oil to be able to carry out their activities. So yes, they want to be heard. So you find that they lack synergy. They lack that commonality to work on common issues. So you find that there are so many civil society organizations. So even some of maybe the African Union, the governments, they don't know who they want to work with, right? So I think, and one of the things that we're trying to tell our civil society organizations as we implement this project.
First of all, when you say we don't know who to work with, is it out of fear or is it out of lack of knowledge or ignorance?
No, it's not. When I say that they don't know who they want to work with, what I meant is that the government finds that there are so many civil society organizations that are there, so they might not know which one to engage on which particular issue or who to trust when they are put to task on which particular issue. And that's why our main call is civil societies across the continent must unite. And because when they are united, they'll be able to create more impact. So on the other side of the government, I think the biggest challenge that civil societies would say the government puts them into is where they are not given the free space to be able to air their issues, or the government does not listen to them, and we have seen that along the spectrum of human rights, where there is so much human rights violations. Our civil society organizations raise issues, but the government does not listen. It only tells you that they are not heard or they are not implemented. In the space of education, I think the biggest challenge civil society organizations are facing is that education has evolved over time. So the question is, where do civil society organizations fit in the education spectrum? Because technology has come in. So I have not seen civil society organization coming out strongly to help the government implement digital policies, for example. So education has also changed. Like, for example, the dynamics and the systems that many countries in the continent are doing reforms in education. So as they reform, the civil society organization is not evolving at the same speed. So you find that the civil society organization is left behind, and now they find themselves irrelevant. So I think in education, the biggest challenge has been too much changes, too many embracing of too much technology in place, and civil society organizations remaining docile. So my call for civil society organization is that they must wake up and they must be dynamic. As policies are changing, they must also acquaint themselves with those kind of policies so they're able to follow through on what the government would like to implement. Yes.
When you say that they are lagging behind, it can be caused by so many factors, one of which CSOs mostly depend on international funding or fundings in order to keep charge and keep continuing to do what they do, So how can we do to ensure that CSOs do not remain behind? And do you believe that governments should be able to sponsor some of these civil society organizations in order to keep them on toes?
That's a very good question. Because when it comes to lagging behind, it means that you are not in tandem, you are not as fast evolving to advocate for new changes in policy. And I think what government can do there, because when you lag behind, sometimes you don't have the resources to do your work. So that's why I call for synergy. When civil society organizations come together, it also becomes easy to look for resources to be able to do your work. And some of the civil societies have also lagged behind because the government can say, hey, we have some resources, can you access them and do your work? But what that does is that it compromises the work that you want to do. So some civil society organizations have lagged behind because they stick to their call and the ethos that were founded upon, where they don't want to be compromised in working with the government. So there's a very strict balance where you want the resources to do your work, but again, you want to remain independent. But another thing I've noted in the African continent is that many civil society organizations are coming up as business tools to just follow resources, and many civil society organizations are not following impact that they want to create in the society. Most of them are following resources, and that's why now you find that if you call a meeting where the civil society organizations are not going to get transport refund, the civil society organizations are not going to get per diems, they don't turn up. But if there's a donor, an international donor who has called for a meeting, many of them are going to flock there with the hope that they are going to get resources. In fact, in the civil society space, they say, if you don't have resources, you have no one to work with. So that is one thing that I think is something that will change. But that dynamic, I can attribute it to those young civil society organizations that have come up in the last 10 years or so. those civil society organizations that have remained there for through the test of time have learned, I think they have gotten their own independence of thought and the issues they want to address. So in fact, in most of the cases, those ones are already financially stable, so they don't follow money to be able to remain relevant.
As we come to a conclusion, what would be your message to the government and to CSOs as we come to a conclusion, so that we can ensure there is trust among them, and there is also that collaboration that will be forever lasting and help the people and the people on the ground?
Moving forward, the African government, through the African Union and through the various regional economic communities, must listen to the civil society organizations, and the government must also be receptive to be criticized. I think someone says that if you're not open to critics, you're not open to improvement. So the government must be open to critics. They must be open to listening to the voice of the civil, because most of these civil society organizations are in touch with the ground. They know what people are saying. Most of them talk to communities. So when the civil society is speaking, it is the people who are speaking. So in that particular case, it's good that the government listen to the civil society organizations. And for the civil society organizations, they should remove this mentality that government is always negative. Government does most of the positive things. So when you put governments to task, or you criticize government in a positive way, they are going to listen. But again, you can't be so abrasive and using you are not civil in the way you do your work. So the government listen. The civil society must also ensure that they are always grounded on evidence when anytime they want to raise an issue. And that's why, for example, in the Data for Governance Alliance project, we are training our civil society organizations across the continent to just use data and evidence, especially from credible survey sources like Afrobarometer, World Bank. We have other things like Mo Ibrahim, where because those surveys, they actually have a lot of information on what the African citizen want. So when they ground their issues on evidence, then the government will always, most of the time, listen. And again, the government and the civil society, they should always be friends. At the end of the day, it's the citizens' welfare that is on the table, and that's what we should always aim to fight.
Thank you so much, sir.
Yes, thank you.